Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, welcome to this session. It's not the best time of the day, I know. The very last session of the last day of the public forum, but it's good to see a good number of people attending this session. This is a session that is being co-organized by the Center for the Promotion of Imports from Developing Countries, CBI, based in the Netherlands, and the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development, ICTSD, based here in Geneva. The title, Services Trade, Why It Matters to Africans. Even though we'll focus quite a bit on Africa, the focus will be more general, actually, more general on LDCs. I'll be moderating this session. My name is Vinay Ancharaz. I'm a senior economist at ICTSD. I wanted to start by giving you a very quick sort of background on LDCs trade in services. Again, I'm not focusing on Africa as such, but mind you, Africa as a continent features about 2/3 of all LDCs. So sometimes when you talk about LDCs, it's almost synonymous with Africa and vice versa. So let me just move over there so I can.
Mr. Speaker.
When we think of LDCs and services, it almost sounds like an unlikely marriage in the sense that LDCs typically don't do services. I think that's the general feeling that arises. But we are here today to dispel that myth. There has been a lot of work done recently that shows that LDCs are very much into services, increasingly so now, more than ever. There are successful case studies, stories emerging of LDCs integrating into global services value chains, and those are some of the material that we want to present to you. But also, the session would be a lot about how we can help LDCs, what can be done to help LDCs unleash their potential in services trade. What others can do, obviously, in terms of providing aid and technical assistance and investment, but also what LDCs themselves can do. And here we are talking about the whole, all about reforming services regulatory policies and addressing domestic supply side constraints. So just to give you a very quick roundup of LDCs in services trade. And the focus here would be commercial services. Services trade data, as you know, is very patchy. We don't have good measures of services trade as such. Services itself is spread across 4 modes, but the kind of data that we usually have is on mode 1, cross-border supply. You also have data on other modes, but not in one data set. So if you look at, for example, balance of payments data, that's where you get data on commercial services. But if you're looking for mode 3, you should be looking elsewhere. So the point is, you don't have one place in which you get a comprehensive data set on services. It's scattered, and even then, it's patchy and not always very reliable. But if you look at this picture, it tells you that LDCs, commercial services exports, have increased quite significantly over the past 13, 14 years. From about 5, I'm looking at the bars, from about 5 billion to over 31 billion. That's more than a 5-fold increase. Yet, LDCs supply less than 1% of the global services market. The good thing, though, if you look at the red curve, and for that you have to look at the right axis, which shows the shares, the share has increased more or less constantly over the years. It's about 0.7%, less than 1% in 2013. 0.7% of the global commercial services market, which is valued at about 4.6 trillion. I think what this suggests is that there is a huge untapped potential there for LDCs. The glass is practically empty. You can go all the way. In terms of the share of services exports in their GDP, again, you see a more or less constant evolution over the years, which is good news, which basically is saying that LDCs are increasingly into services. Inward remittances, that could be a crude estimate of services via Mode 4. Crude, I say, because Mode 4 is temporary migration, but remittances are also sent by permanent migrants, so it's difficult to really differentiate, but it gives us a crude idea. And if you look at the graph, it's very telling. Over the years, remittances, inward remittances received by LDCs have increased significantly, constantly. And what's interesting is that even during the financial crisis, that's the point quite clearly, nevertheless, even during the financial crisis, remittances did decrease, while other resource flows suffered a decline. So that sort of suggests that remittances are quite resilient to financial crisis. But if you look at what is it that LDCs actually are exporting in terms of services, well, the usual suspects come up. It's mainly travel and transport. Transport is the blue, the bottom blue bars, and travel, the second one, the red. You can see the significance of travel. Not just that, but also across LDCs, there is significant variation. You could imagine, for example, for landlocked LDCs, transport being very small, transport, export of transport services being very small. If you think of a country like Ethiopia, with Ethiopian, which is a big player, transport is big. So there's a lot of variation across countries. But then we see that this is what I call these transport and travel, or what I call the traditional service sectors. In terms of the non-traditional service sectors, the top bars, small, but again, we see a constant increase through the years, which is promising. So in this session, without taking too much time, we are going to talk about how LDCs are integrating into services value chains, talk about some of the success stories, talk about what was done in terms of policies, in terms of technical assistance, in terms of aid. We'll talk also about how the LDC services waiver can boost services exports. ICTSD, as a matter of fact, recently did a series of studies along with 2 other partners on operationalizing the LDC services waiver. we came up with a catalog of preferences on the basis of which the LDC group has been able to formulate its collective request and submit it to the WTO. So that work has been done. It's a rich volume of studies, 16 case studies and other studies as well. And we are going to draw on that to inform how the LDC services, what the LDC services waiver can do to help LDCs increase their services, but also touch upon the, and this is also what came out from these studies, that if there are preferences, then you can export more, but then you can do it only if you have the capacity to export services. So there's a whole issue of addressing capacity constraints. There's a whole issue of addressing regulatory barriers that impede services trade. And we'll focus on aid for trade as well. So I have 4 bullets there, and in some way, the 4 speakers will be touching on each one of them. And we have a very interesting panel of speakers here. On my left, Sherry Stephenson, who is a senior fellow of the ICTSD, Paul Tija from the CBI, a consultant, but working also with CBI, if I can say that. Darlington Mwape, a former ambassador from Zambia, also senior fellow with ICTSD, and Rashidul Hassan, who is the vice president of BASIS, Bangladesh. So we'll get started with Sherry. Do you want to go first?
Yes, that's fine. I just
Okay.
need my presentation
Okay.
up.
Let's just,
Do you know how to do that? You know you do have to do that.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks. That's perfect.
Thank you so much, Vinay, and it's a pleasure to be here. I know this is the last panel. You're all very brave. We hope we'll make it worthwhile for you and that we'll have time for discussion and your thoughts and interaction. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it and for allowing me to go first. I'm going to try and set the stage a little bit and provide an overview, which I'm sure others will then deepen with particular sectoral experiences. So very quickly, I want to try and set the context in terms of services trade in the world economy, but I'm going to go through this very briefly because a lot of you know this very well already. So honestly, I'm going to say this very quickly, like lightning. So I just want to point out that this is what the WTO publishes in terms of services trade statistics, okay? First of all, this is cross-border trade, so we know it's, mode 1 primarily, and this is commercial services trade, and you can see from the left that it's actually not increased that much in terms of world trades in the tan bars. Sorry, this is not very clear, but the idea is that, really services, if you looked at the WTO statistics, you'd say, well, services haven't been that dynamic, really. They're only about 20% of world trade, 22%. Why do we care about them? And many developing countries said exactly that. If they're only less than 25% of world trade, 22%, and they're not growing that fast, why do we care? We care because that's not the real picture. The real picture now can be understood because of the publication, finally, of a new database on trade and value added. And this database on trade and value added tells us that services don't really represent what they used to be shown as a gross value basis, but they really represent actually about 50% of world trade. So how did we move from 20% to 50%? Because the database on value added captures the contribution of services as inputs into the trade in manufacturing products, agricultural products, natural resource products, and everything else, and services. So it captures all the intermediate inputs of services into final products around the world. And that's what really counts. Because so much of trade is encompassed or in other goods that we actually weren't counting it properly. And services add significant value to manufacturing and agricultural processes. Without them, you actually wouldn't have trade and you wouldn't have these products. So services have been the unknown enabler of world trade for a very long time. And now we understand that probably they're more than half of world trade on a value-added basis. And I suggest to you that there's a compelling case for only considering these statistics when you are looking at cross-border trade and services. And this does not include the other modes of services that we know from our WTO definitions. Mode 3, commercial presence, FDI and services. Mode 4, movement of natural persons. This does not even include those components in these statistics. We're only measuring cross-border trade here. So we're in a different world. Services is the most important sector of our world economy. 2/3 of world production, 2/3 of world employment on average, 50% of trade on a value-added basis, and nearly 2/3 of the value of foreign direct investment flows. We are in a services-led world. And services are both driving economic growth. They're also actually the recipients of the largest flows of foreign direct investment. And what's interesting is that services exports are growing in importance across all income groups. So this is not just a phenomenon that you think, okay, well, services are important to the developed world. We know that. But what about Africa? Are they really important to Africa? Yes, the answer is yes. And even more important in some cases than we imagine or than in many developed or middle-income countries. So we're in a world where world trade looks different, where the role of services is very much different, has been underappreciated, and where services are largely driving these changes in world trade in terms of a world of trade services, insurance, communication, construction, transport, financial services, things that we use every single day of our lives, and so do firms, so do traders. You could not evolve in the world economy without using these services, and neither could firms, neither could producers, neither could exporters. So this is why services are actually driving GDP growth. But what is interesting is that they're driving GDP growth for economies at all levels of development. If you look at the left side of that chart, you'll see that the sources of growth for developed countries are primarily services. It's on the left, whereas industry is the red component. Services are the little blue dots. But what's also interesting is you look at it for low-income developing groups, and services are also driving their growth. The difference is not quite as marked, but yet they are the most important source of growth also for that group of countries. And if we break down the developing countries into different income levels, then this chart is very, very telling and very striking, because actually it shows how services have been contributing to GDP growth across different groups of income level countries. And the red line, can you see red? That is the low-income countries where actually services have been the driver of GDP growth at the fastest rate over the past 5 years. Very striking. And the LDC group, which is the bottom line, the gray line, has also been actually contributing tremendously to LDC growth, services, GDP growth, since about 2008, since the recession actually, since 2009. So in both cases, both LDCs and low-income countries, services have been critical to their growth over the past year. So now I've just set the general stage for you, and let's look at Africa. What about Africa? I'm sorry I don't have a pointer. Maybe I do have a pointer. Yes, I do. This is sub-Saharan Africa right here. This is the value added that services contribute to GDP by region. This is the African region. It's not so different from other developing regions. Services already contributed in 2011, more than they did to GDP in South Asia, and almost the same amount they did to GDP in Latin America. So services are important to Africa. Let's look at, again, a different a different view of regional contribution of services. And here we have sub-Saharan Africa, which is this growth line here. And you will see what is striking. It is actually services that have raised the relative growth rate of sub-Saharan Africa far above the other developing regions of the world, again, since the recession, since 2009. So Africa is not being led right now by manufactured growth, by agricultural trade. It's being led by services. And I think African leaders are slow to wake up to this, but are starting to realize this. I can tell you that for the very first time this year, in 2 weeks, the trade ministers of the African Union member countries will have their agenda, and for the first time ever, trade and services is on their agenda. For the first time ever. And this is a striking change in perception and understanding of the role of services in Africa. Here's another chart. Africa is becoming a dynamic exporter of commercial services. Between the year 2012 and 2000, whoops, I made a mistake, and 2013, Africa, which one is right there. This is the growth of services. Between these 2 years, it was only in Africa where there was an increase in the exports of commercial services between these 2 years. It's very, very interesting. Very quickly, I don't want to take up too much time. Services are also the sector that has been receiving the most foreign direct investment in Africa. This is Africa. Services are the yellow part, more than in manufacturing or in primary sector. The number of projects, new investment projects in Africa in services has been higher than the new projects in either manufacturing or in the primary sector. So investment is leading trade in many cases, and that's the same. And investment, I would say services are very important for Africa in several ways, because you cannot be an efficient exporter of anything if you're not an efficient producer and importer of services. So Africa has to be an efficient importer of services and eventually a more efficient producer of services. Services are important domestically for employment creation, for reducing social disparities. I don't have time to go into all of these, but they're important considerations, contributing to gender equality and female employment, critical for innovation, and critical for the ability of SMEs to engage in world markets. So I believe that, as Vinay said, African economies as a whole have an untapped tremendous potential in services. It has been tapped to a certain degree, but there's still much, much more that could be done. I would say services are key to improving the connectivity even within Africa in both trade and in goods, services, and people. So let me now go to some examples of African countries that are already successfully exporting services. I think examples are nice because they bring this down to home, really concrete things. I'm not going to go into BPO services because we have experts on the panel to discuss this. So very quickly, countries on two different sides of the African continent, Ghana in West Africa, Uganda in East Africa, have become successful exporters of education services. And then in West Africa, Ghana is the leading institution for students from Francophone countries to go and learn English and other things. In East Africa, Uganda has traditionally been the magnet to attract students in the East African community countries and even further abroad. These are examples of the number of students, foreign students enrolled in the 4 top universities that attract students from the region in Uganda. There are a variety of reasons for this, but these are all interesting case studies. I'm just showing you the results, and I don't have time to go into the background reasons. Kenya, a large exporter of professional services. Kenya has the most advanced human resource base in the East African community region. And what's very interesting is that the types of professional services exported are lawyers, architects, engineers. And the World Bank did a study, and they said, how do you export these professional services? They surveyed different firms. And a lot of this was through Mode 1, as you might expect, providing advice and engineering plans and so forth over the internet. But 60% of it was through Mode 4, actual movement of these professionals abroad to other countries. So these exports are carried out both through Mode 1 and through Mode 4. Nigeria exports financial services, a very large net exporter of financial services, and in this primarily through both Mode 1 and Mode 3. Nigeria has invested Nigerian banks abroad in a large number of subsidiaries. To give you an example very concretely, there were 20 commercial banks in Nigeria in 2013 with 5,810 branches, and 11 of these banks had established subsidiaries outside of Nigeria in over 20 sub-Saharan African countries. And 9 out of these 11 banks also had branches in 4 continents outside of Africa. You don't have chance and you can't read this, but just so you believe me, this is the chart. It's taken from a study by the Bank for International Settlements 2013. So if you have time to look at it later, very impressive success story. Everybody says, oh, African countries don't invest abroad. Yes, they do invest abroad. Mode 3 exports. And these Mode 3 exports lead to Mode 1 exports, cross-border exports, and Mode 4 exports. Burkina Faso exports cultural services very successfully. And who would have thought that personal, cultural, and recreational services were the second fastest growing sector in the world economy over the past 5 years? Who would have thought that? But they are, right behind computer services. The world, now we have a little bit less worry, hopefully, and more leisure, and a little bit more disposable income. People are traveling. They're consuming cultural services. In Africa, Burkina Faso is capturing this market. Traditionally, it has had a comparative advantage in this area. The cultural services sector employs about 170,000 people. This figure is old. And it has huge events, including the Pan-African Festival of Cinema in Ouagadougou, the National Cultural Week, all kinds of things, jazz festivals, hip-hop, you name it. And it also has theater schools, where students from all over West Africa go and are trained in theatrical performances, dance, music, etc. Zimbabwe exports nursing services, Mode 4. Zimbabwe actually trains many more nurses than they can use at home. Many of these nurses are unemployed and highly qualified. And Zimbabwe has now been sending nurses all over the world, including to Europe, the Caribbean, and Australia, as well as other neighboring African countries, and many of these through government-to-government agreements. Give you an example of the surplus of nurses in Zimbabwe. In 2010, they only could employ 374 nurses amongst the 1,516 trained. So there is a large surplus on which to draw. Ethiopia exports energy services. Who would have known? Ethiopia is becoming a large exporter of energy based on hydropower to its neighbors. It has already begun exporting to Djibouti and to Sudan, and this year will begin exporting to Kenya. So a large, and that would be obviously through Mode 1. South Africa exports ICT services successfully, has been doing so for a few years now. Actually, this is a very interesting case study example because it was very much as the result of directed policies of the South African government support policies put in place as of the year 2007 that this sector has been able to grow and prosper. And now South Africa has a nearly $1 billion annual valued ICT sector. And not only has it been able to export, but it has moved up the value chain in these offshoring exports in order to move into software development as well as legal process outsourcing or offshoring, which are higher value-added activities within the value chain. So this actually is an interesting example, the case study that appeared in a World Bank volume a couple of years ago. So these are a little bit, I could almost have chosen any country in Africa and found some type of exports that they are engaging in, whether it be in Mode 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's hard, if almost impossible, to find a country that is not exporting services. So it's a very exciting field because I think much of this is unknown and very much underappreciated. And I would say, suggest to you that this is only very much the beginning, that the potential is very much there, still can be created and drawn upon and expanded much further. So this is a world for Africa that I think we are going to see much more in the future. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks, Sherry. Let us move on with Paul Tia, who will talk about CBI's role in developing capacity in developing countries, especially in the ITS BPO sector. But I hope you will also be able to give us a more rounded view of developing countries' experience with in that particular sector. If you can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As Sherry said, there are a lot of developing countries already offering different kinds of services, and I will focus on IT, information technology services, and business process outsourcing services. But having said so, it is always very difficult for them, being far away from the developed world, to find clients. So a lot of work is needed in promotional activities and export promotion, and this is the topic of my presentation. And I do this on behalf of CBI. Three topics I will cover. First of all, the market side. And I will use my country, Holland, as an example, because Holland is one of the smallest countries in Europe, one of the smallest markets, but nevertheless a major market for IT services and BPO services from developing countries. And secondly, as I already said, I will talk about the promotion of IT and BPO services if you want to build your export industry as a developing country. And I will use some examples from Bangladesh, because the next speaker is from Bangladesh, and there has been some collaboration in this field. And at last, issues of country branding, because most of the developing countries are really not known as potential exporters of services. But first, a little bit about CBI. CBI is a Dutch agency of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it deals with a lot of sectors, by the way, in agricultural, industry, consumer products, and finally services. So they deal with a lot of sectors, and they also assist a lot of countries. And as far as BPO services and IT services are concerned, CBI is doing projects to promote the industry in Colombia, Albania, Macedonia, in Asia, in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and I'm doing now some work for Palestine. So this Dutch agency is quite active in the field of promoting services from developing countries. And interesting is, we all know products can be made everywhere nowadays, but knowledge, because of the high level of education also in developing countries, also knowledge can be found anywhere in the world. That means IT services or BPO services, and they are all knowledge-based services, can be found anywhere in the world, including a lot of LDCs. And that means global sourcing, as we call it, is now a trend in the Western world of IT and BPO, business process outsourcing. And this creates opportunities for developing countries, but also challenges. Because we are now talking about a subject, a lot of developing countries, they want to attract employment by building their services industry. But if they get employment, a lot of jobs are disappearing from the Western world. So this is a problem for example, the Dutch IT industry, when we see all the jobs moving away to India. So it is a challenge for Europe and opportunities for other countries. And I mentioned India is one of the best known examples of a very successful software industry. It is really an opportunity for India to create a lot of employment. More than 1 million people are now employed in the Indian IT industry. But India also had its challenges, and this is a picture from one of the largest Indian IT companies. And what you see, a beautiful office space, modern equipment, working in a very nice environment. and the people there in India are earning much more than the average Indian is earning. But what you also see, this is not really an office building. It used to be a factory. It used to be a textile factory in Mumbai. And India was not able to compete with China in the production of textiles. And they lost a lot of work, a lot of employment also, to Indian factories. It was so globalization for India in this field was a big challenge, a big problem. But fortunately, they could convert this old factory into now a modern office building and giving employment for a total new industry. And fortunately, what is growing in countries such as India is also a result of a growing demand in European markets or the United States. And a small country as Holland, we have been sourcing IT services and BPO services from developing countries already for more than 25 years. So at the end of the 1980s already, the first Dutch companies started outsourcing IT work to India. And at the moment, all the major and well-known Dutch enterprises, I mentioned Philips, KLM, ABN AMRO Bank, KPN or Heineken Beer, all high-intensive IT users are all outsourcing part of this work to countries such as India. It is not new anymore, it is part of modern business. But those large companies are working with India because big companies like to work with big suppliers. But fortunately for smaller companies from smaller developing countries, also the smaller Dutch enterprises are moving to use outsourcing as well. So a small company of 10 persons in Holland, they have their own IT center in a developing country and they employ maybe 80 persons. So that's a trend. Also smaller companies are being users of services of developing countries. India is the main destination with billions of dollars being earned by Indian companies from Dutch clients. But we also see a lot of developing countries, especially Indian companies, are setting up their own offices, their own marketing offices in Holland as well. They start small as a marketing office, but eventually they are growing. They are also employing Dutch staff now. And even the largest Indian companies, they are employing Dutch programmers to do a lot of on-site work in Holland. So globalization in a very advanced way, you can say. The main reasons, they are well known, of course, cost reduction. If you can do it cheaper in a country such as China or India, it makes sense also in the field of services. Because of the many technological changes in the field of IT, it is sometimes difficult to find specialized IT skills in Holland, so companies are forced to find the staff abroad. And they don't mind if it is in a developing country. Sometimes there are also strategic advantages. You can easily introduce new services or products by using the skills from abroad, or you can access new export markets. And in a few cases, there are social reasons to start offshoring, because a company is interested to create jobs, especially, and not so much for this cost reduction issue. And also in IT, we can see a growing range of services and activities which can be done in a developing country. In the field of information technology, it's especially software development which can be done, developing new systems or maintaining existing software in all fields, and especially in the mobile field, making apps. This is quite popular to do it now on an offshore location. There's also what we call BPO, business process outsourcing, or ITES, IT-enabled services. It is not really software development, but it requires an IT infrastructure. And we can think about call centers, administrative work, game production, animation, and data entry. This is a picture, by the way, of a French-speaking call center in Senegal, offering services to clients in France. You need an infrastructure, of course, and this is something the Moroccan government is really promoting nowadays. And they have been building this high-tech park in Casablanca, especially for Moroccan or foreign companies who want to be active in using Moroccan resources. Another example from Kenya, a well-known call center, CanCall, and they are offering English-speaking call center services to clients, and you can see the flags of the UK and the United States. And the Dutch, we did it with South Africa, by the way, because in South Africa, the Afrikaans is being spoken, which is a quite old version of the Dutch language. So those South Africans were being trained to speak the real current Dutch language to be used as call center operators in South Africa. Which was not a success, by the way. There was too much difference in the languages. But now we are using Dutch-speaking call centers in Latin America, in Suriname. They speak the Dutch as we speak it nowadays. And with the modern telecommunication, we do not know if the phone call is from Suriname or from Holland. It is not known at all anymore. But competition is fierce. There are a lot of developing countries now offering all kinds of services. And with the red stars, I made some examples of developing countries offering IT or BPO services. Not only developing countries, by the way, because if a country is cheaper than Holland, it is potentially interesting. So you can see the red stars in Eastern Europe. And then, of course, we go to Asia. India is the most important one, but also the neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan. They are also potential outsourcing destinations. We go to the east. Also Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, China. Even the most isolated country in the world, North Korea, is trying to promote itself as an outsourcing destination, which is quite strange because it is one of the few countries where internet is not allowed. But nevertheless, I'm taking a delegation with me later this month to North Korea to investigate business opportunities over there. South Africa, it's quite popular. For example, Mexico, Colombia, Nicaragua is being active now, Mexico, Suriname I mentioned. Africa is less red in this regard. There are some North American countries, Egypt, for example, South Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Senegal. And then we have the Middle East, Egypt, Palestine, Jordan. So there are a lot of developing countries. And with the yellow stars, I indicated the countries where the Dutch companies are already doing business with. So also Eastern Europe, Asia, a little bit Africa, a little bit South America. But to be honest, we are in an economic recession, and sometimes the tariffs in Spain or Portugal are as low as in certain high-level developing countries. So it is cheaper to find a programmer in Spain nowadays than with one of the largest Indian companies. So some Dutch companies, they are now opening up in Spain or in Portugal. So the whole world of offshoring services is always changing. Every country is different, so it makes sense to use a model to investigate the status of a country and also to investigate the export success factors. And I wrote a book together with an American author, and we use this so-called oval model to have a quick look at the local industry, where we start in the middle of this model with the IT industry or the BPO industry, where we look at how many companies are there, what is the size, what are the services they are offering. We must look at the infrastructure. How is the telecommunications network? Is there electricity 24 hours? What is the availability of capital? Because if you want to go into export, you need capital for export development, for marketing. What is the policy of the government? A lot of governments already have their vision on IT or the vision on IT exports, but not all of them. What is the wage level in the country? What is the cost level? Suppose you want to hire an office. How expensive is it? Human capital, how many graduates are being produced by universities every year? What is the quality of those graduates? What is the quality of life? Is it an attractive location for foreigners to visit? And this is one of the problems we had with Bangladesh. If you want to bring an IT delegation to Bangladesh, it is not really well-known or attractive location. So this is more challenging. If I want to bring an IT delegation to Gaza, it is not even possible because Israel will not give us any permission. So there are difficulties and differences with all the offshore locations. And then finally, there is this top part, the linkages. Many countries, they already have linkages in the sense of, for example, a diaspora. So for Bangladesh, there are a lot of Bangladeshi already in the UK. And the Indian IT industry, they were able to grow so fast because of their diaspora, especially in the United States, which could build business connections relatively easy. But if an African country has no linkages in Europe, for example, then it is more difficult, of course. But in any way, if a developing country wants to start finding clients for their exporting industry, a lot of promotion and marketing is needed. And that's the experience we had in Holland. If you want, as an exporter from a developing country, if you want one client, one new client in Europe, at the bottom of this picture, you will have to do a lot of marketing activities and you have to build a database of a lot of contacts. New contacts, out of which only one in the beginning will be your first real client. And that means that successful marketing is also a numbers game. You must be able to attract a lot of leads, prospects, potential clients. And in many cases, you cannot do it on your own as a company or even as a country. You have to try to have donors involved in this export promotion. It could be an organization as CBI, but even CBI is trying to work together with other donor organizations. For example, the ITC, International Trade Center here in Geneva. And I use this as an example for our Bangladesh activities. But with those matchmaking activities, even the most difficult destinations can be successful in finding new clients. And this is one we did in Holland. A Dutch company did a lot of data entry work to Gaza. They were not able to visit Gaza, by the way, and the people from Gaza were not able to visit Holland. But 150, and Sherry already mentioned, female staff were able to work for this project in Gaza. So a few examples, and the speaker from Bangladesh will also go on this in more detail. Example, a Bangladeshi delegation visited the Netherlands, and a lot of work was done to arrange business-to-business meetings, which was impossible for any Bangladeshi company to do it based in Dhaka, but you need local assistance to do this. Another example, an IT seminar which was organized in Amsterdam with the topic outsourcing to Bangladesh, also with some speakers from Bangladesh. Another example, organizing business missions, and this is an example from an EU mission which visited Bangladesh with participants from Holland and Denmark at that time, where we visited IT companies in Dhaka and where we also arranged for B2B matchmaking meetings. And always out of those missions, new clients are a result of this. Another example, a trade fair participation where in this case a number of Bangladeshi IT companies went to the CeBIT fair in Hanover, and the CeBIT is the largest IT fair in the world. And CBI every year has a booth where the companies from Bangladesh made use of. And finally, country branding, because most of the developing countries are not really known as exporters of services. We also worked on the issue of country branding, and on YouTube you can see dozens of videos promoting Bangladesh, but also individual companies from Bangladesh. We used journalists for some articles on the IT and BPO sector in Bangladesh. KPMG was involved to produce a country leaflet on Bangladesh, and one of the results is that A.T. Kearney, in its annual country list published a few weeks ago, for the first time mentioned and put Bangladesh on its list of most promising countries. So it requires a lot of work, but then it can be quite successful. So if you want additional information, the CBI website has a lot of information, including market reports on both IT outsourcing and business process outsourcing. If you want to have a closer look on Bangladesh promotion, you can search on this project called NTF2 on the ITC website. The book I wrote on offshore outsourcing is available on Amazon. And if you have any questions, just drop me an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Very interesting observations, very interesting. Is also following on from Sherry's presentation, an increasing number of success stories, of evidence about how developing countries actually are into services. And also one thing that is coming from these presentations, and which I must emphasize, is the sustainable development dimension of services, the inclusive nature of services. I was attending one session yesterday where there was a lot of discussion about how, talking of Africa, where Africa is one of the fastest growing regions of the world, yet many people are still unemployed, yet poverty reduction is still evasive, and many people have been left out of from the growth process. Why? Well, a lot of discussion, a lot of it is centered around the concentration of many African countries in agriculture and especially natural resources, which create a few jobs. But services is a sector that has a promising employment potential, especially for women, which is a very significant, therefore a significant way of including a sector of the population which is often left behind. That is one dimension of inclusivity, but another dimension of sustainable development related to services, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is the fact that this is a sector that is resilient to economic crisis. At least we have seen it over the past few years. We can't generalize because we haven't really tested it strongly over time, but it is a sector that has proved resilient to economic crisis. So two important dimensions of services that as something that can contribute to sustainable development. So following on Paul, he talked quite a bit about the case of Bangladesh, and therefore I think it's only natural that I now call on Rashidul Hassan to talk more specifically of the Bangladesh example with experience with IT, IT and BPO. I hope you will be able to highlight how Bangladesh did it, what was the regulatory framework that enabled this to happen, and also highlight any sort of technical assistance that you received that made this journey possible. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Vinay. To mention very early that Bangladesh is a country located in South Asia with 140 square kilometer area, and with 160 million people there. Bangladesh, the government running Bangladesh, this is the second time this government is running. When the government came in the power before we have election in 2009, and then this government, who are actually running now, had a mandate by the name Digital Bangladesh. This is a mandate to actually to deliver services, citizen services through IT and IT-enabled services to reach the citizen. From then, we passed 5 years, 5.5 years, and I want to proceed on giving you a good news that Bangladesh received global ICT Excellence Award by WTO, that is World Information Technology Services Alliance, on 30th September. That means 3 days ago. This is one of the major achievement and recognition for Bangladesh. In this presentation, I will try to address our current scenario, current position of our IT and BPO industry, and our plan, what we actually taken, where to go, our destination, and our vision, and how, what are the challenges actually to achieve that goal, and how to overcome those challenges. Before that, I want to share with you that BASIS is a trade body organization with about 800 members, or 800 companies, and I am Vice President of BASIS. I want to share with you a number of global recognitions. A.T. Kearney, as Paul said, A.T. Kearney listed Bangladesh as a listed in a global service index listing as one of the actually we ranked 26th among top 50, and we ranked first in financial category. A.T. Kearney actually published this report with 3 categories. One is financial attractiveness, and second is availability of resources, and third is infrastructure. And this is very good news that we become number 1 in financial attractiveness. Then I want to mention Gartner. Gartner mentioned Bangladesh one of the top 30 outsourcing destination. And, you know, Elance Odesk is the freelancing marketplace where Odesk published an article that in October 2013 that Bangladesh is the one of the 3rd most popular outsourcing destination. You know, there are lots of opportunities in other countries, but in freelancing platform, Bangladesh is one of the third most popular outsourcing destination. And COFACE listed Bangladesh among the next 10 emerging countries. Goldman Sachs listed Bangladesh next 11 after BRIC, that is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And JP Morgan said that and listed definitely as a frontier 5 countries. in this presentation, I'm going to share a vision. We have two visions. One is Bangladesh Next. You can see in the corner, is the right corner. This is a brand which actually we are carrying for outside of our country, and inside our country we have another plan that we call One Bangladesh. One Bangladesh is a vision with 4 pillars that we actually addressed our problems, and we planned how to overcome those and reach a destination. Like first pillar, we will achieve $1 billion in software and ITS and BPO export by 2018. We will train and create employment for 1 million software, ITS, and BPO professionals by 2018. We will bring 1 crore people of Bangladesh under internet connectivity each year. And last pillar is software and ITS and BPO sector will contribute 1% of our GDP by 2018. I will go through each pillar and address the current scenario and our challenges and our vision, and we will how we're gonna address those challenges and overcome those and to reach our goal. So number 1 pillar, we will achieve $1 billion in software and ITS and BPO export by 2018. What is our current position? In 2011 and 12, we got export growth. Export was in 70 million USD. That was growth, 56% growth from previous year, and 2012, 13, we got 101 million USD. That is 43% growth from previous year. And 2013 and 14, we got 124 million. That is 23% growth from previous year. This is actually this figure actually is from our Export Promotion Bureau. That means this export is actually those who are exporting through our government channels and bringing money through Bangladesh Bank with a listing. Beside this figure, we also have another 100 million unlisted export. Like, as I said earlier, lots of people are working in freelancer marketplace, and lots of people have Envato marketplace, and they're playing a good position in those marketplace. And we assume another 100 million export are from those. That means we have currently about 250 million USD, and we want to reach to 1 billion USD export growth in 2018. So how gonna reach that? We need we have different challenges, like business environment is a big challenge that A.T. Kearney mentioned, and there was also another publications by KPMG. They also mentioned same thing, like infrastructure problem, capacity building, and KPMG also mentioned another point, that is information security kind of thing. Like we did not have in 2012, we did not have information security law or information security kind of thing. So how are we going to address these challenges? In infrastructure, we have currently 100% growth in power supply during the last 5 years. We are going to build, this is in the process, high-tech park in 265 acres. We have lots of incubators now. We are planning to build STP in all divisions. We have 7 divisions in our country. We are going to build STP, Software Technology Park, by the help of government. We are going to connect with second submarine cable. We only have one, and we are going to connect second submarine cable within this year. Our government has provided 3G and 4G license to our public operators, telephone operators. So internet kind of thing is not a problem now. Cost of internet reduced 10 times. And it is actually in process to reduce more and more. Government is facilitating with finance, like government has fund, equity entrepreneurship fund, where government giving 49% of total investment in IT. That is a great help for our companies. Also, income tax has been exempted till 2018. We are actually having this facility for the last 10 years, and still we have income tax is exempted till 2018. That means more 5 years, and we hope it will be exempted till 2021. The good news is, if a company from outside Bangladesh or from Europe or America wants to invest in Bangladesh, they can bring their money easily without paying income tax or something like that. Government has taken lots of projects to develop our ICT sector, like government has allocated a big fund for quality certification of our companies. That is, for export, quality certification is a very crucial thing to export. So, government has taken that initiative. By this year, we can proceed for more than 100 companies for quality certification. Export help by CBI. I want to strongly mention here that CBI, the government of Netherlands, I want to thank the government of the Netherlands governments to help us. CBI actually helping us with various projects. I can mention here 2 projects, like ECP, Export Coaching Program, and another is NTF, Netherlands Trust Fund. ECP is running a second time in Bangladesh, and NTF also running second time in Bangladesh. That means CBI helping in our export for the last 10 years. And finally, we want to mention here that Cyber Crime Act under implementation. Recently, we have our Cyber Crime Act, and it is under implementation by awareness building of our people and our companies. It is here mentioned that KPMG mentioned one thing for cyber security or security of intellectual property of thing in 2012, but also they mentioned that there are no such incident happen for the last decade. So that is also positive, but by this time we have our Cyber Crime Act that is under implementation. So we hope business environment will be much better upcoming years. And another thing that already mentioned by Paul, that is country bendering. We are always actually facing this kind of thing. as we have seen from our study that lots of NGOs, non-government organizations, are working in Bangladesh for poverty reduction or something in education sector or somewhere else. But what they did actually, what they are spreading like negative kind of things outside of our country to actually get some funds from their donors so that they can work with that. That is also a kind of thing we are addressing. We are participating in a business summit. We are arranging and participating in a different summit in Europe and USA. We are participating in seminars, symposium, both local and abroad, to promote sector and country as well. International firm has been recruited to uplift our country for IT among IT services. The next pillar we have. Our next pillar is we will train, create employment for 1 million software and ITS BPO professional by 2018. That means to achieve our goal, we need our HR ready. Currently, we have about 400. We have our 250,000 professionals, IT and BPO professionals. We want to make it 1 million by 2018. How gonna make it? We have approximately 5,000 core IT graduates every year from Bangladesh universities. HR training, we have lots of HR training. A core focus of BITM, Basis Institute and Technology Management. We have BWIT, that is Bangladesh Women in IT. We are involving women in IT sector. We have LICT project, leveraging ICT project by government, where we are bringing more professionals to IT. We have employee incentive program. That means if an employee wishes to work with IT sector, government gives incentive for those employees. We have a skill development program by Bangladesh High Tech Park. And we have internship program by government. That means government also encouraging fresh graduates to come in IT sector. Basis has a student forum. We have another program that is Fast Track Future Leader program by World Bank funding. We have IDB Bisho IT scholarship for non-IT graduates. We have lots of private training houses who are actually giving IT training and ITS training. We have lots of distance learning course portal with contents in English and local languages. We have a project with government for mobile application and game development, where government is giving training for mobile application and game development resources. Our next pillar is we will bring 1 crore people of Bangladesh under internet connectivity each year. Currently, we have 39.35 million internet subscriber by optical fiber or twisted cable and mobile devices. We're gonna add 1 crore people more in this stream.
Just clarification, crore is 100 million?
Crore is 10 million. Yeah, 10 million. I actually mentioned those in my earlier slides. I just want to mention one point here. We have 117 million mobile phone user. That means our 74.5% of our total population have one mobile phone. So this is a very good point that we addressed. We want to deliver our government services through this through the mobile application, so that they can get government services, citizen services through their mobile phones, their smartphones easily. We have fourth pillar. I already addressed all these things, but if we can avail our last three pillars, then we can, of course, contribute 1% from software and ITS sector to our GDP by 2018. I already mentioned all these things. This is my last slide. Here is some few summaries that I actually talked. Bangladesh is a land of opportunities. We have 65% youth. That means we have people whose age are 18 to 35 years. This is a great information, great resource for us by which we can achieve our goal. We have 250,000 IT professionals. As I said earlier, our target is 1 million by 2018. That means if we can achieve our goal, we will never have any HR problem or HR kind of thing. As I said in my last slide, we have 117 million mobile phone users. That means 74.5% of total population. 26% internet penetration countrywide with countrywide high-speed fiber network and 3G and 4G network. We have 350,000 graduates per year from our universities. And finally, 100% growth in electric power creation. That is a huge achievement for us. And not last but not the least, income tax waiver we have till 2018. And we hope if you come to invest Bangladesh, we can help you to increase this income tax waiver till 2021 or more. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashidul. I think this presentation highlights one important point, which is that the government, especially when it comes to services, can play a crucial role in creating, nurturing, developing, strengthening a competitive advantage, more than in the case of goods. In the case of services, probably the sky is the limit, because it's human, it's skill-based, and that is something that can be developed. And many countries are increasingly investing in this, in developing their knowledge base, their skill base. So services, especially IT services, can be a very important driver of growth in developing less developed countries, African countries in the future. And that brings me to Ambassador Darlington Mwape, who will talk about LDC services generally, but bring in especially the African perspective.
Thank you. Firstly, a few disclaimers. I'm not an economist. I'm a lawyer by profession. So I'll do what I'm trained for best, is to concretize the argument for services in Africa and LDCs, and hope that by the end of this presentation, we'll all buy into the fact that the services are an important aspect of development in the LDCs as well as Africa. The other disclaimer is that my slides are not as flamboyant. I'm a lawyer. We are We are supposed to be sober. The outline. I will begin by introducing and painting a picture of what we are talking about when we talk about LDCs. I think we need to step back and understand which set of countries we're talking about, what are the characteristics. Then we'll talk about the state of the LDCs trade in services, looking at the global picture, and also highlighting the fact that there are potentials. In Africa, LDCs, we always talk about potentials. But I hope we can discuss how we can realize the potential in trade in services. Then try to build that by sharing some success stories and to try and convince all of us, I know it's an open door, that indeed trade in services in LDCs does matter. The majority of African countries, as you know, are LDCs, 34 of them. And therefore, when you speak about LDCs and Africa, you cannot really separate them. Mind you, there are 54 African states and 34 are LDCs, so it does make a lot of sense that when you're talking about Africa, you talk about a particular case of LDCs. This category was established in 1971 by the UN General Assembly, and the primary goal was not to simply stigmatize that these are the most poor of us. It was primarily to try and direct support to those countries. And therefore, from 1971, various measures have been taken to try and move support to these countries. They represent 12% of the global population. So this is a population that, and growing, mind you, so this is a population that you cannot ignore. Now, this set of countries is characterized by weak human and institutional capacities, low and equal distribution of income. We were just seeing evidence of growth in the presentations. But that growth sometimes is not translated to poverty reduction because of the lack of distribution of income. Since 1971, only 3 countries have graduated from this list, and that's Botswana, Cape Verde, and Maldives. I need to make a point here that services were the driving force in this graduation. Maldives is primarily and Cape Verde primarily the service tourism countries. There are 3 criteria of determining an LDC. One criteria is low income. The second criteria is low human development. The third one is vulnerable economic development. And one of the indicators in deciding the vulnerability is the instability of exports of goods and services index. So that index indeed also covers the aspect of services. So services are important in order to determine the graduation of these countries. What is the state of LDC's trade in services currently? The global trade in services account for 70% of world's GDP. It's huge. And 45% of world's employment. So if we are going to talk about, employment interventions, we really need to be talking about services. LDC's participation is a dismal 0.5%. Of course, it's rising, and some statistics show a higher number of global trade in services. Concentration of LDC services trade is in traditional services of travel and transport, 52% and 24% respectively. Now, LDC's commercial services exports more than doubled. This is in the period, 2005. to 2011 from 9 billion to 22 billion. So there's really an increase in the services trade. The average contribution of services to LDC GDP is and was 47%, and this is a figure going back to 2011. But the potential should be noticed, and in my last point there, the potential of growth of services in trade is immense. While GDP is while services are contributing 47% to the LDC GDP, they are only contributing 10% to total LDC exports. So you can see that the sort of potential is there. And again, we will talk about potential, but we really need to start realizing this potential. How do we do that? I think that as Vinay had mentioned at the beginning, we need to look at issues at the LDC country level and also on the market side, on the market access side. Eliminating barriers to entry into LDCs, making FDI possible. Now, and this, of course, means some domestic reforms to take place, which will remedy regulatory weaknesses, including issues of tax. We've just heard from Bangladesh how the waiver of income tax is playing a pivotal role in accelerating investment in ITC. Now, one issue I want to talk about, this is paragraph 26 of the Hong Kong Ministerial Declaration, because this is one of those things that are usually cited by LDCs. I have to confess that I'm one of those, LDC citizens that do not believe that such provisions actually help, because if a provision is that you are not to take commitments, basically it means that you will not open up and you will not build your capacity of reform in order to invite FDI. So it basically works against you. That's why I highlighted paragraph 26 of the Hong Kong Ministerial Declaration. The last point there is, of course, improved market access and deepening regional integration. As Vina had indicated, most of the landlocked countries, transport is a real issue, and therefore regional integration plays a vital role in services such as transport. Now, so we are talking about, FDI playing a role in services. We're talking about market access. So, FDI. How do we capitalize on the of FDI flows in order to accelerate services trade? Now, services are accounting for 60% of world's FDI. 2012 FDI inflows to LDCs, they hit a record high. And even now, LDCs continue to be key services investment destinations. The UNCTAD World Investment Report 2014 shows a marginal increase in FDI inflows from 24 billion in 2012 to 28 billion in 2013. This is to LDCs. Only 1.9% of share of global FDI inflows, but it's still significant in real terms. So if we have this continued trend, I believe that it will facilitate the growth of services trade from LDCs. It will also enable to leapfrog in value chain and overcome supply side constraints. Because, if today one is going to set up a mobile phone company in Zambia, which is an LDC, they will not go and establish an analog system. So they will bring FDI to to provide a service which is on the high end of the value chain. So this really helps to leapfrog in terms of the value chain. Now, on the market access side, we have the WTO LDC services waiver. As you know, it was adopted at the Ministerial meeting in 2011. And after 2 years, there was inactivity in this respect, and the decision was taken in Bali to make operational the waiver. The waiver is basically an exception to the MFN provision in Article 2 of GATS, which allows developed country members as well as developing country members in a position to do so to give preferences in the nature of market access. If you look at the waiver, it specifically talks about Article 16, which is market access, but it does indicate that a developed country member may give any other preference, but subject to approval by the Council of Trading Services. Now, I have noted there that when we were negotiating the LDC waiver, and I recall that when I was coordinating the LDC group, we argued vehemently on the fact that we needed to include domestic regulation in that waiver. It can be included with approval of the Council, of course, in the current form, but it is not a given. You will see that most of the presentations that have been given, regulatory reform plays a vital role in services. And therefore, if you do not include domestic regulation, the barriers for entry for LDC services will be more difficult. And therefore, we are not resolving our historical problems that we have seen in respect of other waivers. So I hope that our developed country members could see this and extend preferences to domestic regulation as well. The other characteristic of the waiver is that it is in sectors and modes of supply of interest to LDCs. This is very important, and this is very an interesting aspect of services, in that you make a request on sectors and modes that are of interest to you. There is, interestingly, an Fdi Supportive Clause, which basically makes possible for a non-LDC company which has, which has what is called substantive business operation in an LDC to be able to benefit from the preference. This is, of course, makes possible what we were talking about in FDI, and builds, creates a platform for services to flourish in that respect. The LDC members have had studies done. ICTSD was part of that, and other organizations, and they have come up with an ambitious collective request. Consultations at a bilateral level are going on in the WTO, and we expect that the high-level meeting will give a clearer picture on what the developed and developing countries are able to do in response to the collective request that has been made. The decision to make operational the waiver indicated that 6 months after the request, this high-level meeting is to be held. It is hoped that the preferences should be well structured so that we can build on the lessons of the preferences that have not really performed, and make this one a reality in terms of the potential for LDC services. Some success stories quickly. Rwanda has services sector which contributes 45% to its GDP. Its exports in the period 2005-2011 grew by 282%, reaching 318 million. Tourism alone in the first half of 2011 recorded revenue of 115 million US dollars. They have a vision. Again, it goes back to what Vinay was saying. Government plays a vital role in policy and regulation in order to make the environment suitable for services. Now they have 14 banking institutions, 7 insurance companies, and 66 microfinance institutions. Senegal, services contribute 60% of GDP. Exports in commercial services grew by 47% in period 2005 to 2011. Employs 37% of labor force. This is in comparison to 33% in agriculture, 14% in manufacturing. So when we talk about employment intervention, services is really playing a pivotal role. Again, the focus on tourism, competitive advantage. They have a competitive advantage. This was an interesting point in the call center outsourcing over France because they are cheaper in terms of labor, and also it has been found that their teleworkers are more qualified than France on the same job. Uganda, the sector contributed 51% of GDP in 2011, 30% of employment in services sector. Commercial services export grew in that period by 176% to $1.3 billion. It's a net exporter of travel, ICT, and financial services. ICT has had the highest growth. In the 2003 period to 2004, it was $0.7 million. It grew to $31 million in 2006 and $45 million in 2012. Again, it is the government policy as well as a regulatory framework that makes these things success stories possible. After what I have said, Chair, I'm sure everyone will agree with me that there's only one conclusion, that trade in services matters to LDCs. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlington. I think we're all convinced. At least I am. Let's open the floor for some questions. We still have a bit of, well, we are 5 minutes to 6, but since we started 15 minutes later, I think we can have questions for the next 10, 15 minutes. Any questions, please?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the presenters and the sponsors of this forum. I have a few observations to make, but also to ask one simple question. I think one of the key observations is that in the development of trading services, just like it's the case in trading goods, skill development is extremely important. The importance of skill development cannot be underestimated, and we have seen, just as in the case of Bangladesh, that there is need for a concerted effort on the side of government, but also working hand in hand with the private sector to focus on identifying the critical areas where skills are required, and then move head on how to close the gaps. Now that takes us to the issue of looking at the fact that if skill drives development in trading services, then that means it is knowledge intensive. And so if it's knowledge intensive, then those who actually invest in developing that knowledge need to be protected. So the issue of intellectual property rights comes in. I've not heard much about that, coming in the discussions. Maybe somebody will highlight at some point how the issue of the intellectual property rights is being addressed at a global level or at a regional level in respect of developing trade in services. But one other important thing which I think we should also look at is the fact that we should not look at trade in services in isolation of trade in goods. I think there's a very thin line in between the two of them. I mean, if you look at the arguments, for example, now coming in the global value chain idea, the issue of it's not being enough to participate in the global value chains, but does your participation really create value in the overall, contribution to value in the global value chain? And we realize that the reason why LDCs are losing out in the global value chains and developing countries in general is that they concentrate on those activities which add less value, particularly manufacturing. And the activities that seem to appropriate more value in the global value chains are service-related. If you look at the concept of the smiley curve, for those of you who are familiar with it, investment in R&D, aspects of design, and then the other upstream activities which relate to branding, marketing, and so on and so forth, is actually where there's more value. Now, those are actually service-related. And so they are in one way or the other linked to the trade in goods. So we don't have to look at trade in services in isolation of trade in goods. To some extent, yes, there are aspects of trade in services that do not have much to do with the trade in goods, but there are also aspects of trade in services that are actually directly linked to trade in goods. Thank you very much.
Can we take a couple more? Yes, madam.
Je m'appelle Madeleine Shep.
I'm Madeleine Sepp, and I'm a head of a program in Cameroon and here in Geneva. And my question's about services, trade in services. We see many deficits in the field of services, and that's of some regret, and that's often because of the quality of services. So in light of this, I'd like to know, concerning Mr. Darlington's hopes to be able to assist in improving trade in services in the sub-region of Central Africa, particularly my country, how this would work. Thank you.
Sorry, we were trying to put on our earphones. Which country are you from? We couldn't get that one.
Je viens du Cameroun.
I'm from Cameroon.
Je viens du Cameroun.
Cameroon.
Et de l'Afrique centrale.
Cameroon, an Africa country in Central Africa.
I had a question with I'm in favor when you say that services matter to LDCs. For me, that's not really a question. The question is, to what extent does it matter? I come from India, and we did have a services-led boom, so to say, in our economy. But the growth in services did not generate equivalent amount of employment. So when we talk about some countries leapfrogging stages of development and becoming services-led economies from agricultural economies, is that a sustainable approach to growth, in your opinion?
Okay, I think we have some challenging questions here. I'll leave it to the panelists to answer the questions, the ones they feel most comfortable in. Starting with...
Do you want me first?
Sherry, would you mind?
No.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for these questions. They're good questions. I think they're good questions. I'll address all three. With respect to the gentleman's question on IP, you're absolutely right. If we had been able to entertain a discussion, you're right in both of your points, absolutely. Services are intimately linked with the operation of global value chains. In fact, services enable the operation of global value chains. Without services, we wouldn't be in a world of value chains at all, because it would be impossible for firms to fragment their production. So they're intimately linked with that. And you're absolutely right. It's important to move up the chain, but it's also very important to enter the chain. So there are two aspects. And yesterday when I spoke on global value chains in a panel in the afternoon, I showed a slide that showed different kind of paths within value chains that were that are available to developing countries when they're thinking about this phenomenon. And one path is like entering the value chain, and then one is competing within the chain, and one is upgrading within the chain, and one is leapfrogging within the chain. And all of these are different and require different skill bases, and they even require different government strategies in a sense to do. But I would say, first and foremost, you can't do anything in a chain if you're not inside it. So the first thing is, how do you get into a chain? And then the second question is, what do you do once you're there? And one of the important aspects for getting into a value chain is exactly the first point you mentioned. You have to have human capital. Services, by definition, are human capital based. And when you're in a value chain, you can be in a value chain of a good. You can export a part of a goods value chain, like a computer chip. But more and more, increasingly, what's interesting to developing countries is to export the services, because services are much more easily exported by small and medium-sized enterprises, because they do not encounter the infrastructure constraints that firms encounter when they are trying to get into a value chain in goods, where you necessarily have to have efficient ports, efficient shipping services, transport services, efficient distribution, and all kinds of things that many developing countries don't have, quite frankly, yet, at least on a commercial, worldwide scale. But to be in a value chain in services, you don't need that. You just need efficient telecom infrastructure. And so you can export a BPO service, which is what our panel has been talking about, or an ITO service, which is what we've heard, and with so many success stories on the part of developing countries, because this infrastructure component is not needed, and also your SMEs are able to participate more effectively. So you don't have that constraint, and that's why. But what is important is aspects that we haven't addressed because we didn't have time, because we didn't talk about value chains directly, but the IP aspect and component is absolutely critical. Without a good regime for IP protection, you're not going to be able to attract investors who will invest or outsource from you these type of activities. And I believe that you can speak to that as well, Mr. Tihaya. So I would say yes, absolutely, to both of your questions. And the second question on the trade balance is from de notre collègue de l'Afrique centrale. C'est la question sur les...
That's the matter of physical trade in services, and I think that question is very important, and it's a wider concern that we often encounter, often in developing countries. Indeed, it's a major concern. Concerning the trade balance, however, we mustn't forget that it's no less important to be able to import services in an efficient manner as it is to be able to export them. All countries which are, so to speak, towards the beginning of their development have, without exception, been net services importers. So they've experienced a deficit in their trade balance where services are concerned. So it's not something to be concerned about. Rather, it's a natural phenomenon. It's something which characterises that stage in a country's economic development. And I'd even go so far as to say that it would be concerning to find a country at that stage in its development which had a trade surplus in terms of services, because services which have to be imported are costly ones. They're efficient services which have to be procured abroad, and they call for very intensive capital investment. An example is telecommunications, another is transport services, financial services is another, energy-related services. All of these services require intensive capital expenditure. another thing to mention is that without efficiently importing those services from abroad, it's impossible to become an efficient exporter of other goods and services. And that's because efficient services are pivotal if future production is to become competitive and efficient, if costs are to reduce, and if the economy is to be stimulated. So it's not something that we should worry about. Rather, we should worry about making sure that the most competitive services from around the world are imported to make our own economies efficient.
This is sustainable growth path. We had a very interesting panel yesterday afternoon. Maybe Fabian wants to comment on that as well. When we looked at the relationship between trade and services and employment, it's a question that's not often addressed, but it's a very important question. And you're absolutely right. The high-paying jobs in the service sector, they don't generate as much employment as more lower-skilled paying jobs. Is that a question of worry? It should not be, for two reasons. One is that these higher-paying jobs in the service sector actually stimulate the productivity in a generalized way in your economy. They have, I would say, how do you say? Knock-on effects, spillover effects that go backwards into your economy that are really, really important, that are felt in other sectors, even if the employment impact itself is not as large. But the second reason that I think it's interesting to examine it a little bit from a broader angle is there was a presentation yesterday by the chief economist of the ITC, and it showed that the indirect impacts on employment from services activities are actually more than 2 times larger than the actual direct employment effects. So I think for both of these things, we need to maybe not be quite as worried as you might be in the initial. Thanks.
You had a specific question from the lady from Central African Republic.
Yeah, I think that I need to go back again to what I was saying about the Hong Kong Declaration. Sherry has just been talking about the importance of intellectual property protection in order to create an environment in which investment is going to feel safe. So the question to the LDCs is that does it help you to postpone your time of implementation? Why don't you start to get assistance to implement so that you make an environment in which FDI is going to flourish in terms of services? That's one aspect on intellectual property. How do we assist sub-Saharan countries in Africa to grow their services? I can speak for what we're trying to do at ICTSD. We'll soon be doing, we are currently doing studies looking at the current sectors of interest for LDCs and African countries, trying to see where the potential lies, what are the challenges, and see how we can bring in the success stories from other regions to come and share with Africa, and then be able to, in that process, interact with you to try and raise your services trade. So that's one of the things that we are working on as ICTSD.
Yeah, just a brief remark. First of all, I think the export of services, especially IT or BPO services, is interesting for a lot of LDCs. And I give maybe an obvious example, Gaza. People cannot go in or out Gaza. They cannot export or import goods from Gaza. Even with the tunnels to Egypt, it is closed nowadays. So they only have one option left, to export services through the internet. I must also say it is not a silver bullet for all kinds of economic activities. And India is an example. On one hand, it's a very successful example of a growing IT industry. On the other hand, it's quite still in Indian economy an isolated sector. And what worries me, all software in the developed world is made partly by Indians. It could be made in India, maybe by Microsoft India, or the Indians are employed in the United States or Europe at the companies. But India is not still a producer of their own indigenous software products. Nobody here is probably using any Indian software product. So even a successful Indian IT sector can do a lot more to develop itself.
I think that was a very good point. Can we go for another round of questions, and then we'll close? Any more questions, please? Okay, I think we all we have been able to stay up for this session up till now. It's been a long day, and I'm sure we all want to go home. So let me thank the panelists here. Thank you also for attending this session, for staying with us till this late hour. I wish you all a very nice weekend. A round of applause for the panelists, please. Thank you so much.